It's a 200 cob, Schultzy. How are you, mate?
Mate, not too bad. I'll tell you what, I'm bloody sick of this rain though. I had to mow a couple of lawns this afternoon. I just did them in the rain because I've just got the shits with it that much. But other than that,
Yeah, it'll dry out. You're whinging about the sun.
mate.
Got to whinge about something. Yeah,
Maybe
I'm
I'm
in.
just becoming a whinging old man.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit like that. Get off my lawn. Yeah, I'm in Toowoomba. We're up here. We're planting me granddad tomorrow. So it should be. I mean, it's sad, but it's still. It's not bad. Like he's 89 years old. He was starting to get dementia, and he's passed away pretty well for how other people have. So realistically, it's going to be a good catch up. See a heap of family that we haven't seen in a long time. So that's tomorrow, and yeah, we're going from there. What have you been doing?
Well, mate, yeah, basically, just running around like a madman, just trying to get all this work done in between the rain and all this sort of stuff. But, mate, I've also been doing ever since you got people wanting to or asking people to get in contact with us since Friday. I think we've had about 7 or 8.
Yeah, it's good. And
Oh,
there's some funny ones.
yeah, well, there are
And what
some.
I love, there's a few that are giving it to us, which is good. That's what we wanted. We give it straight back.
Well, do you want to start with some of the funny ones, mate?
Yeah. So our good mate Jez Brunton from the Northern Territory, he just randomly sent me a message in the middle of the night the other night, and he goes, "You pair of dickheads, don't know what you're talking about." And he's finished it off with some smiley faces, but I wouldn't know. He's like, "Shit, he might be onto something." So I wrote back to him, "Shit, you're onto us." Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, well, mate, I've got one from Geordie here. So it's pretty funny because I open it up. Said, "G'day, Dingus and Shuey. Surprised you've made it through this many episodes. For a couple of blokes that have a personality of a soggy chip, I'm impressed.
Yeah,
Um, amazing to hear the stories you tell. I would have thought with mugs like yours, they would have kept you in highway patrol acting like a bunch of scorned old men that have turned into pure dickheads with power."
yeah. Yeah, he's got us. He's got us in one.
No, but mate, he is no, he top bloke. He basically sent through. He's got a couple of cops that are friends. He said earlier on in his life he probably had a few bad run-ins with the cops, but never really realised behind the scenes. And he said our podcast has helped him realise. And he's got a couple of mates that are cops now that go and have a drink with him. And he said, you just don't realise what they've been to like previously, before they dealt with you. He said it could be a 12-hour shift dealing with death, DV, and a whole lot of shitload of other things. And he said you just don't see that. So it kind of basically made him realise that he could be having a beer with a cop that's just dealt with a whole lot of real shit.
Yep.
Yeah. So which is I mean that's what we really wanted to get out there. So no, so I'm happy, and mate, he wants to have a beer with us as well. So that could
We can
be.
arrange that for sure.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You don't have to twist my arm much.
No.
But, mate, one thing he said he'd love to hear some stories of little perks about being a cop, whether it's a little boy waving at you, granny making you a cup of tea, cake, or sneaky free pints at the pub from an appreciated citizen. He goes, he doesn't want to hear anything that's not allowed. But,
Yeah. Well, to answer him there, basically, I didn't get anything like that really through the thing. One thing, talking about the little kids waving, one thing I used to get a bit in the communities, you might be dealing with an absolute shitstorm in the middle of the night, and a little Aboriginal kid would come up and sort of cuddle into your leg and just
yep.
feel safe. And you just look after them, you put your arm around them and just make sure they're happy. So there was that made you feel good. But
Yep.
you might be dealing with an absolute horror show in front of you. But yeah, just to be able to do that was always good. But as far as like the gifts and stuff, that's all done. Like that doesn't really happen anymore.
No.
One thing that used to happen Christmas Day, especially in the more regional centres, people from around the community, business owners and stuff like that, would bring in big cheese platters or big fruit platters and stuff like that.
Yep.
I know that the pub in Catherine in I think 2008, 2009 Christmas Day, they'd bring in cartons of beer over to the club, just shouted, so that after the shift you can go and have a beer on them. That
Yep.
was always good, like that sort of thing. They didn't have to do that it was just a bit of appreciation. So
They also gave food, mate. I think it was 2007. Yeah, they brought up a massive. I think it was 2007. They brought up a massive platter of food.
yeah. He was pretty on side there. Publican, he was pretty good. So
Yeah.
yeah. What
So,
else, mate? You got a heap. You read them out before we started. There's a
oh,
heap.
mate, we're going to be here for days.
Yeah.
Um,
I think what we might be able to do, we can probably go through a few of them another time to get other
yeah,
things out
yeah.
because we will be here for a couple of hours.
Literally, mate. Literally,
Yeah.
mate. What I'll do is I'll just touch on the other ones just quickly,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and then good old Damo Duggs. He just got in contact because he said, "Yeah, your podcasts are crap."
Yeah. Good work. Stop. And that's the other thing is like, no worries. What's your podcast about?
Actually, I reckon we might get him on, mate. We'll give him
Yeah,
a
I
bit
think
of
we should.
notoriety.
I think we
Um,
should.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of others. Basically, I can't mention this one's name. So this is about the cadetship down in WA, and what we're he basically just going through down there and wants to know. Um, we don't have cadets in the Northern Territory, so not at the moment. They were there was a cadetship years and years and years ago, but and we have got someone who's a very good mate of ours that will come onto the podcast in a future episode, and we'll talk more about this. And he's the famous Ray Musgrave. I
Yeah.
spoke to him yesterday, so or infamous, you could say, maybe to the bosses. But he's probably almost a longer serving police officer in the NT Police at the moment.
He'd be
Um,
getting bloody close.
he
Yep.
we yeah, that's right. I think there's one out of his cadet that's still there. So he told me
Yeah.
yesterday. But no, we're definitely going to get him on the show and talk about that. But one thing interesting that this guy asked, he said, like, is it normal to feel out of your depth? And I know we spoke about this a while ago. We all felt it, even with. So he's talking about life experience. Even with our life experience, Damo, both of us have stated that when we got on the road, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing.
No. And talk
Um,
about out of your depth. That can happen all through your career.
mm,
I worked a lot with COVID towards the end, and not really. I mean, there was a bit of enforcement, but not really. It was more about coordinating people coming into the country and all that sort of stuff, and also a lot to do with if we had little outbreaks in the territory, getting those people into quarantine. And I remember feeling out of my depth. Absolutely, I've never felt the pressure of the world on my shoulders like I did. We had to bring in a community. A heap of community members were brought into the quarantine facility. I'm not sure if I've spoken about this before, and basically, people had escaped, for want of a better term, out of the quarantine facility and caused basically little close contacts all around Darwin. So I got an email. I wish I'd kept the email chain, but basically it went from the chief minister's office to the commissioner, to the assistant commissioner who was covering that area, so covering the emergency operations stuff, to the incident controller, to me, and it basically said, I need a quick briefing on what's occurred last night with the breakout. For like, it wasn't a breakout, it's not a secure facility, it was basically the breach. And he said, I want the reply in 10 minutes. And I got it and opened it and said, yep, stand by. And I sent that back to the chain. And then the commissioner wrote directly to me, and he wrote 7 minutes, Barb, straight to me.
yeah,
And so from the commissioner of police, you've got 7 minutes to respond. And the reason the time was so full on is because he was about to go into a press conference. And long story short, what happened was I made a couple of frantic phone calls, got the detail of what I had, and just had to reply with a one-liner.
yeah,
Basically, I said, what's happened is this. These people have escaped. They've gone here. They've done a few contacts which are being investigated. But it must be noted that this is a quarantine facility for compliant people to carry out their quarantine. It's not a prison. And he quoted me on the press conference about 5 minutes later. So yeah, that was a lot of pressure. But that's one example out of thousands where you just go, oh my God, we need a
yeah,
battalion. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, sorry, mate. You
Mm.
raised a very good point there. I mean, all through your career, you end up with situations like that, and sometimes like there's things in the police that have to be done ASAP, and you got to get them for one reason or another. I do remember, and I I recall when we were doing the detectives course, and they had the media unit come in, and they were saying that, I think it was when that person was a kid or something, was eaten by a crocodile or something like that, and they had to go and do a press conference. But they'd organised a press conference in 5 minutes' time, and they'd just found, the crocodile that basically ate them, and they were cutting it open and all that sort of thing.
Mm.
And anyway, they said, so we had to get the information, like we had to rewrite this whole thing. And I said, just tell them to wait.
Yeah.
They said, what, about the press? And I said, yes. I said, we're the bloody police.
Yeah.
Tell them to wait 5 minutes, they'll get the story. But then they said, oh, they'll make up a story. And then I said, yeah, then you make them look like dickheads when they're
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. Yep.
That was
Yeah.
my point, mate. But that was a police perspective, or police officer's perspective, not probably
Yeah.
hierarchy.
But there, yeah, mate. There's times out in remote communities. Talk about overwhelmed. The longest shift I've mentioned before, it was 43 hours. I've never felt so overwhelmed. The phone kept ringing, the problems kept coming. You just couldn't escape it. It just never ended.
Yeah.
And your body just goes into shutdown. It's like being just drunk when you're awake for that long. It was terrible, and you just can't escape that phone. So it was, it was a show.
Yeah, mate. Yeah. And yeah, so in answer to that, mate, you don't feel out of your depth. Oh, you always feel out of your depth, even like you said later on in your career, because everything you face is new or that's on a timeline. But you just manage to get done. The only advice I would give is a lot of people said to me, if they want to know something, they usually call me, not because I knew it, but I knew who knew.
Yeah,
So just make contacts are the best thing you've got. Somebody that you can call that will give you the answer that you need. So
yeah.
that's why networking is so important in the police.
Oh, mate, and that's exactly it. It's a big blue team. It's not all about just you. It's a team sport. So yeah, there's always someone to ring. There's always a phone that'll be picked up with a high-ranking person at the other end who can help or can send help or can do something. So yeah,
Yep.
certainly feeling out of your depth is something that will happen a lot, and probably pretty relatable to a lot of people, I'd say.
Oh, definitely. Yep, for sure.
Mm.
Mate, and then we've got another one. So Annie said, love the content. I said, hi guys. Unfortunately, she'd binge listened a little too quickly. And when will more episodes be released? And she wants us to do 2 a week.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, yeah.
Mate, we're not short on content at the moment. That's for sure.
No, no.
So yeah.
What are we on about today?
Well, mate. Well, hold on. We've still got another one,
We're
Damo.
still going. Sorry, mate. I'm
Mate.
jumping the
I've
gun.
got 2 more before we get on to the one with the subject. So,
Yeah.
um, this is your doing, my friend. So we got one from Amanda. Basically, she's animal welfare inspector. And she came onto our podcast because she's looking at things to help her improve her role as an animal inspector. But she found ours really good with dealing with, I suppose, some of the stuff that she sees in the job.
Mm.
Um, Now I know both of us have probably quite a few animal welfare incidents that happen through our career.
Yeah.
I, I'll just touch on, if anybody ever looks up the legislation or the under the Animal Welfare Act, there is some of the best powers police have got. I had to look at it a couple of times in relation to a couple of jobs, and I tell you what, for search and entry,
Mm.
it's almost better than any warrant.
Yeah. No. Animal welfare is, most people like animals. I raise livestock. I'm pretty, pragmatic about it. I understand that they have a role to play, and being slaughtered is part of that. But it's all done very humanely. I'll never forget. I was very junior in the job, and just a quick story on animal welfare stuff. We had a mother, so a mother dog had a fairly big litter of pups, but she was very ill and she was basically going to die. And these pups were completely dependent, so they were going to have to be put down as well. And I mean, the quickest and most humane way for us to do that was with a rifle. So we had a 22, and anyway, we had to shoot the mother, and then we shot the pups, and we went back, and it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and we're just sitting around in the station, and we're both just quietly sitting at our computer. And it came to the point where it was like, bugger this, we'll knock off and start again tomorrow. It was like there wasn't much going on, and it was just there was no pleasure. That was just a pretty depressing old day. It had to happen,
Yeah.
You know, I'd certainly, you know, I don't regret what we did. It was the most humane thing to do, but it doesn't make you feel good. So I take my hat off to animal welfare people who have to do that sort of thing, and vets. Like, you become a vet because you love animals. You find out most of the time a lot of what you're doing is putting down animals. So it would
Yeah.
be a pretty full on show. But yeah,
Oh,
that's it's funny. I hunt, like, I don't, not a lot, but I have hunted in the past, and you don't. It's all done humane, and you don't feel bad about, you know, removing feral pests and all the rest of it. But you know, dogs are man's best friend, and
oh.
there was nothing enjoyable about that whatsoever. So yes,
Yeah, well, mate, yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, mate, I got a number of stories. But what we might actually touch on that one a bit later on down the track.
yeah,
I'll look at
yep,
some of the legislation and just you know, just to remind myself of it, because there is some incredible stuff there. And look, we please join the job, because one of the things is we do want to help people. And look, when it comes down to it, animals are, you know, the most innocent. Well, most of the time, and the most,
mm,
you do get some ferocious ones, and we've come across those dogs and all that
mm,
sort of stuff. But yeah, like, animals are innocent. And when
yeah,
they get treated poorly by humans, nothing pisses us off more. So
yeah,
it's yeah, yeah. There's some people. Honestly, I've said I'd probably happily put a gun to some people's head and pull the trigger rather than the dog that I had to
mm,
put down. So, but that's my taking on it. I'll
yeah.
probably There'll be Sykes ringing me up now saying I was bloody. But
Intervention, mate.
no, that's right. Well, mate, well, like you said, we've put down a heat before, and it's terrible.
Yeah,
You know, it never gets any better.
no,
Um,
no,
so that's for sure. Mate, also, so we've and I do apologise. I've got on to our technician about our email, but I still can't reply on it. But he said he's going to fix it. So we got another one, and I won't go too much into detail, but it's about our recruiting. We got quite a long email
yep,
in relation to the poor standards in recruiting, or, you know, going through the college and all that sort of thing. So.
mm,
Um, yeah, that's another one we'll talk about. And I do apologise, I haven't replied to you yet. I might actually have to just do it in my own email. Um, but I try and keep everything with two ordinary cops. So,
yeah,
but the technician is onto it, Scottish
good
Stu.
man.
Um, but yeah, a man just moved house. So, but I spoke to him on the weekend. He said he'll do it. Anyway, mate, 15 minutes in. Was it 15? No, 17 minutes in. Sorry.
Yeah,
We're going to move on to what we're going to talk about today. So, um, a lovely girl by the name of Brianna got in contact with us, and she just said it's been really good listening to your podcast. My favorite thing is when you guys talk about mental health, because it spreads awareness, and I love telling my friend's mum the stories from your podcast, and she finds them so funny. It's good to see we're funny.
yep,
Um, so it also helped her understand a lot about police work. She said she had a period where she struggled with her own mental health, and police would always do welfare checks and all this sort of thing. So I won't go into too much detail of what she said, but she did tell a couple of stories of her involvements, you know, with police, and where she'd had a bit of a laugh with them as well. And just because they approached the situation just from a different perspective, and you know, had time to, I suppose, sit down and chat to her and all that sort of thing. Um, which is really important. And she then further goes on to say, since listening to her podcast, she actually wrote a letter to two of the police stations that dealt with her over the years previous, and said thank you,
yep,
which I thought was, you know, outstanding. And look, mate, I'll kick it over to you in a minute, Damo. But I said early on in one of our podcasts that the most important thing we do, we are very good listeners, and when it comes to mental health, you you have to sit there. You have to listen to what they have to say. It's not like going to a job and calling the shots. It can be very, very tricky at times. Um, and I mean, it's like that with quite a few jobs. Domestics, another one. You've got to sit there and really listen to the people and figure out what's going on. But mental health is just a whole new avenue, And it is getting worse in society. There's a number of reasons for that, which we won't go into, or I don't really know all the answers. But it's listening. You sit down and listen, and you've got to try and figure out. We've got a bunch of policy and procedures we've got to follow with mental health, and it makes it very difficult at times. And just quickly, I once convinced a guy to drive himself to the hospital because it was the easiest way to get around it, and I followed him there, and he did it.
Mm,
And that was a guy that had to wear a tin hat.
mm.
But so you do get you just got to take your time. But Damo, you've had quite a bit of experience in this. I think you said through negotiators. So do you want to really give us some more insight into what your experiences were?
Yeah. Look, lots over the time. Look, a lot, not just as a negotiator. That was more when it had escalated to a point where there was threats of harm to other people due to someone in mental health crisis. And that can be with criminality as well. But a lot of the time, it's not necessarily criminality. It's just a severe case of poor mental health, and it's all come to a head. Um, as a general duties police sergeant, so as a shift supervisor, I did go to a lot in Darwin City. You have your regulars, so there's people who they're chronic sufferers of mental illness, and you'd find yourself going around the same tree over and over again with some of them. And the thing is, you had to always be mindful not to lose patience with them. They're not trying to upset you. That they're the ones who are going through a crisis. But um, a lot of like you made a very good point there. You said they're active, so listening, and I was going to add to that. It's active listening. So one thing I did find, especially with negotiating, and I've spoken about negotiating before, but the big thing there is open. I ask the open-ended question and try and get some insight into what's going on in the person's mind, and make sure you listen to what they say, because a lot of the time these people will be very animated and not making a lot of sense, and you kind of need to mirror that back to them. So now, look, I just don't understand. You've said this. You're saying that there's people inside your house saying, I can't see them. Are you sure this is not something to do with what's going on with you today, all this sort of thing? So it's you don't want to offend them, but you don't want to escalate. You want to de-escalate the situation, but you're trying to build that rapport the whole time as well. Mental health, it's like physical health. There's 1,000 different ailments that you can get to your body. Well, the same thing with your brain. I've mentioned that before as well. You can have someone who's just having a really bad day and a bit of depression and threaten some suicide, and you can just sort of have a nice, relaxed chat with them. A lot of the time, I noticed that when we first turned up, there might be a slight elevation in the problem or an escalation in the issue in the fact that armed police are now there. You need to try and de escalate that pretty quickly and build that rapport in order to hold that de escalation. And look, it doesn't always work. There's been a lot of times where it didn't work and we've had to use force. Um, and that never I was never involved in a lethal use of force, but certainly some pretty high level use of force. People in psychosis are very, very strong, quite often delusional, and as a result, they can think in their own brain that they're defending themselves from death, so they're defending their life, um, and that can make them pretty motivated. The big thing that I used to get cranky about was when, on the very rare occasion that lethal force had been used against someone, or where police hadn't quite done it perfectly or by the book, the Monday morning quarterbacks would come out, or a coronial would come back and absolutely slam
Yeah.
police. And it's like, why are police doing this? They're not trained to do it. Well, I would argue that we do it a lot. We do. We're probably one of the main agencies. I know that health, obviously, are the primary agency when it comes to mental health. But when it comes to issues on the road, so out in public, police are generally the people who respond to this stuff. And the reason for that is because we're the ones who can deal with threats of harm to other people. And we've got the training and we've got the ability to use force and to escalate that use of force if need be to protect life and life and property. But that's never the intention. The intention is to de-escalate that as best we can and get those people to hospital to get the treatment they need. Um, Suicide intervention is a constant with there was a lot of what we do is go to suicide interventions. I never was involved in any myself, but I was certainly aware of a number of negotiated jobs where someone actually took their life in front of the police, those various means. I know that's affected a lot of those negotiators who I work with, other my colleagues. I just didn't happen to be at that particular job. So that's what you're dealing with. Um, it's when they go, oh, why are police responding to this? Police do it all the time, and no one ever hears about the successful interventions And
Yeah.
it could be that you had a very, very high level threat that you've resolved through complete peace. I think I've mentioned one where we had a fellow in Darwin he'd broken up with his wife, and he had no criminal history. He'd armed himself with a crossbow, was outside his place, and I had a response in place. I was the night shift supervisor for Darwin City, and we had a TRG night assessment crew with us, and I knew them, and they were really good coppers, excellent operators, and I knew that they were capable of extreme violence when they needed it, but they were also very good, compassionate fellas. And I said, boys, he's in psychosis. He's convinced he wants to kill himself, but he wants to get us to kill him. So I need you close. I need an inner cordon. The TRG at night, they're wearing camouflage gear. They can camouflage themselves up and sneak right in close. And what I said was, can you get me an inner cordon and get eyes on? And they went right in, and they got into a garden bed about probably 20 metres away, and they could see him out the front of his house armed with the crossbow. Where the situation got really delicate was I was trying to negotiate with him on the phone while I was also trying to coordinate the response. So I've got a semi inner cordon with two people sitting in a garden bed, camouflaged up, hiding from him, but eyes on. But I also had an outer cordon of general duties response vehicles that were all around to create that exclusion zone from members of the public. Now, the trouble was he could see over the top of that garden bed at a police car, and he raised that crossbow and said, "If I just shoot one of these arrows at the car, they're going to shoot me." He
Mm.
didn't know there were two armed tactical response officers lying in that grass, lying in that garden bed between the police car and him, and they were talking on the radio, going, "Hang on, he's seen us. He's aiming at us. Stand by, stand by." So I basically had to go, "He can't see you." I had to try and communicate on the radio while blocking the phone so that he couldn't hear me on the mobile phone that I was talking to him with, to tell the TRG guys that he can't see you. He's aiming at a police car behind you. He's not trying to shoot anybody. He's not aiming it at you. So I had to manage that and then flick back. And one thing with negotiating, I think I mentioned it in the negotiation episode, is that you use that technique where you built the rapport and you've established a bit of a deal with the person that they're going to now give up to the police, basically surrender themselves. And one of the effective little tools there was actually to have a rehearsal of that so that there's no surprises. Now the trouble was I was having difficulty communicating with him and also keeping the TRG guys up to date as to what the plan was. Even to the point, I think I hot mic'd my radio directly to them so that we were on a different channel, so I could talk just to them. I hot mic'd them, so that means I pressed my push to talk button on my radio so that they could hear what I was saying to him, so that they'd get that information. Basically, I explained to him how he's going to surrender. I eventually got him to put down that weapon and then surrender himself. And in the end, he did. But the information came past that the fellow lay down, and the TRG guys came out of the garden bed and took him into custody, which really surprised him because he didn't know they were there. But I
Yeah.
mean, we resolved that. And this fellow, when we first turned up, he was 100% hell bent on getting police to shoot him because he didn't think he had the courage to take his own life. Now, he wasn't taken into custody. He was taken directly up to Royal Darwin Hospital for a mental health assessment. So that's the difference. We've got powers under the Mental Health Act in the Northern Territory, and they're everywhere. All other jurisdictions have similar powers and responsibilities. And basically, you act as an arm of health to get that person to resolve the risk and get that person in for the treatment they need. And that sometimes works well, and it sometimes doesn't. But I mean, that's one example. There's so many. Suicide interventions were a huge one. I'll never forget, I got called as the supervisor to back up because they'd walked in on a fella who appeared to have taken his life in his bed. But as they went to check him, they realised he was still breathing, but inappropriate breathing. So for anyone who's done CPR, you understand that you check for breathing, and it wasn't appropriate. So they had to start CPR. But as they started the CPR, it woke him up. So he had a pain response to them actually pressing on his chest, not previous. He was unresponsive previously. So by the time I got there, I'd been called to a deceased person. By the time I got there, he's actually been woken up, and he's now responding to police and communicating, but very groggy and out of it from just the method of how he was trying to do it. But in the end, he was actually, I think he was kind of happy. He sort of saw it as a second chance. That we were like I think he was a little bit religious as well, and he thought, I think the Lord's intervened here and all this sort of thing. So you get those responses. On the other side of things, mental health patients can be very, very dangerous. They can have homicidal tendencies. I've never been involved immediately in responding to. I mean, well, the Ben Hoffman active shooter, he was in a drug induced psychosis, so that there was certainly a mental health aspect to that. I mean, I'm not forgiving him for what he's done, and he's rightly serving life in prison, but he was definitely acting outside his normal. He was a violent person, but he wasn't necessarily a homicidal maniac. So for that to occur, I mean, there's mental health involvement there. But I mean, our use of force on him was going to be lethal if he wasn't compliant. So um, everything in between, mate. You can be just someone who's having a bad day. I told about the 10-year-old boy who was threatening suicide and self harm in Alice Springs, and we just
Yep.
de-escalated that and got him into an ambulance. Unfortunately, he had to be restrained and sedated. We do that a lot. We have to restrain people a lot while the ambos. We work really closely with paramedics all the time, but in mental health stuff, we've normally got them right there. And yeah, they were right there to inject this poor kid and get him up to the hospital.
Yeah.
Another one I tried to. The bloody bureaucratic process made it difficult, but I tried to nominate two of my constables for bravery awards um, for an intervention on a mental health matter with an elderly man who was armed with a what are they called? A palm tree saw. Those big jagged
Oh,
bladed
yeah, yeah.
palm tree saws. Really dangerous weapon. Like if you got hit with that, you'd be in a world of hurt. So anyway, we thought, it's really hot. We have to intervene here. He's gonna actually go into heat stroke if he stays up where he was. He was in full sun in the wet season in Darwin, really hot, humid weather, and very animated. And we could see him sweating, and he was really, been up there for a couple of hours, and it was getting to the point where we were worried about his physical health as well. And my guys formulated a plan. They climbed up onto the balcony where he was and basically took him by surprise. And without using any weapons, they intervened and grabbed him and disarmed him with just bare hands from with that saw. And I mean, they did it in such a way they didn't hurt him, but they did have to restrain him. He's very strong, and they had to get him in handcuffs. And then we had to formulate a plan to get him down from the platform that he was on, and he was still fighting for his life. So I thought it was very courageous what they did. I mean, it was a classic taser. Taser was definitely justified pushing up towards firearm, but they could see that it was a mental health issue. It wasn't that this person was, he wasn't in his right mind trying to kill them. He was just in a mental
Yeah.
health crisis. So
Yeah.
police often take a lot of risk on, and I tell you who else do. Mental health nurses take on a lot of personal risk in order not to hurt somebody in the mental health crisis. So yeah, it's one of those things people don't really think about it, especially down in places where there's not a lot of crime right in front of you. People think police just drive around writing tickets out for people running stop signs. Well, no, they do a lot more than that. So,
Mate, just one thing you mentioned there, and I told that situation where I thought I was really mentally fucked up, and there was a guy that ran at me with a tire and a screwdriver, and
mm,
I tasered him. He went for a mental health check. He wasn't actually intending to kill anybody or anything like that. He was just in one of those psychosis. So he actually got sectioned and sent up to Darwin and all that sort of thing. And like so, yeah, I mean that was a point. If I'd stuffed up with that taser, I'd no backup
yeah,
for anything else after that. I probably wouldn't be here talking on this podcast.
yeah,
But
would have been a
police.
good funeral, mate.
Mate, like I said, mate, I've got plenty of money stored away.
Yeah,
All I want you to do is drink piss and talk my stories.
whack it over the bar. Yeah, don't
Yeah,
have to just play the
exactly.
podcast. Yeah,
um, but you never realize. Look, and mate, just some of the stories you're telling there. We are doing it all the time.
mm,
Part of the thing is sometimes you've got to change your approach on how you deal with it, and you've got to. Police have to be very quick to predict, I suppose, as best you can, and experience helps out with this. But you've got to predict which way they're going. Some people would just want attention. Some people are serious, um, and another point is, I say when I was out at Ramo and Millie, I knew most of the people, so I knew how to deal with them. Through previous experiences and all that sort of thing. So a quick one. I was over at Ramangini, and to get over to Milingimbi was quite hard, especially at night. if the tide was low, we couldn't put you had to wait 3 hours for the water to rise to get the boat across there. Another one, and usually like charter flight was just about impossible. And I had someone call us up on 000, basically saying he was going to kill himself. Anyway, I knew this guy, and the dad called me up, and I said, look, you tell him what he's going to do is he's going to put that knife down. Tell him you've spoken to me and this is my orders. You're going to put that knife down. You're going to walk yourself down to the clinic. You're going to press that emergency button and you're going to sit there and say, I'm here for a mental health check.
Mm.
And I said, if he doesn't do that, tell him that I will be over there and I'll be very, very cranky. And he'll either be arrested or he'll be going to county ward.
Yeah.
That's his two options. And you know what? It was, yeah, because I couldn't get across there. That was just the
Yeah.
way. But it's also because I had drawn that line in the sand and they knew what I was like.
Mm.
If I had to go hardball, I went hardball.
Yeah.
And I knew the person and I mean, that could have failed,
Yeah.
quite easily.
Yeah,
But
you took a calculated risk. I mean,
I
you
did.
had knowledge of the
Yes.
person. It wasn't just some random person. You
No.
knew who he was. So, yeah.
So, but police do that a lot. They
Yeah.
take a lot of calculated risks when it comes to that. Like you said, even dealing with the guy with the crossbow, you you're trying to receive as much information as possible to make an educated decision. And in hindsight, you'll be judged on that.
Yeah, and you'll be judged after the fact. That person
Yes.
won't be there with skin in the game at the time when it's all going down and you're trying to think on your feet and get it done and responding to the situation as it unfolds. So it's yeah, I often do get a little bit grumpy when there's a lot of criticism heaped on police. Don't get me wrong, but there's times where there is criticism and it's worthwhile. But you know, it's easy at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning in a nice air conditioned courtroom to be sitting around and judging someone when you had nothing to do with it, and all you can see is a bit of a foggy body worn camera with
Yeah.
muffled voices, and you can't feel the heat, you don't feel the tiredness, you're not surrounded by the situation, and you don't know the outcome, so you don't know what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very very tricky job. But I mean, this is relevant to policing in general. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't in a lot of situations.
Yep. Pretty
Um,
much, mate.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and mental health. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the people involved in the health department who are involved in mental health are highly qualified professionals. And I would say they do an excellent job. I've had some great interactions with mental health teams on the ground,
Yep.
and some of them are really good. I would even say that sometimes they go a bit harder than us, just quietly. They're
Oh,
saying, "Oh, let's get him
definitely.
in there. We need to get him on the ground and get him sedated." It's like, well, hang on, where's the fire? Let's just chill.
Yeah.
Let's relax. Like, there's no rush. There's no time frame here. Let's de-escalate this and get them. And yeah, we will get them restrained. Now the trouble is, there's a tactical group term called a deliberate action and an emergency action. And basically, what they are is a deliberate action is a well thought out plan that will be executed by police in order to end a situation where certain criteria are met, where there's no resolution here. We do need to resolve the matter, and now we're going to execute a deliberate action. And that's often planned out quite a bit. But on the flip side, there's also what we call an emergency action. So in a siege situation or a standoff like this with someone in mental health, especially when armed, which a lot of the time they are armed, the emergency action might be force needs immediately to be used to resolve this situation in order to protect life. And I've been involved in a couple of them where it was required immediately. We now need to jump and we need to taser this person. We need to raise that level of force in order to immediately stop them doing what they're doing.
Yep.
I've been lucky. There was not a lot of them. I know a lot of other people went to a lot of others. I've seen some done really well. An example of an emergency action is the Link Cafe siege, where basically once the manager was executed, they had to go. But I mean, that's not a mental health thing. That was a terrorism incident, but it's the same tactics.
Yep.
So obviously, negotiators are going to lead the way, and up to a point, and
Yeah.
that's where that reaction is needed. But yeah, especially with a mental health situation, time is your best friend. We've negotiated with a man. It was I think I mentioned him as well. Former prison guard from New Zealand who was really violently assaulted in a jail over there, and he had an acquired brain injury which had caused him to have very bad mental health in the end. and he had a standoff with police where he had a return to hospital order, basically signed off by a doctor, and the mental health services had turned up to sort of execute that order, and he just said no and threatened violence and all the rest of it. Well, we negotiated with him for about 24, maybe 36 hours in teams. This is where you swap in, swap out with your negotiator teams because you just can't stay awake and alert for that long. But yeah, in the end, we did get him to successfully give up, and the situation was resolved without force. But I mean, that there was a lot of work that went into that. It wasn't all luck. There was certainly luck involved in that it did go that way, but you make your own luck a lot of the time. And I think we,
Yeah.
because we were patient, we held back, we listened to those triggers and those hooks, and we used all of our negotiating skills to try and get the best outcome for him. And in the end, we got him. We got him in the ambulance without needing to sedate him. He was compliant, and obviously we keep him under guard. He was a big boy. He was capable of violence. He was unarmed by now. I think he'd been armed with a number of knives inside the unit, which was why we were there with tactical police. But that situation was resolved. They're very rewarding when they're resolved successfully. It's like we've saved this person. There was a very high level of danger involved in this job, and we've resolved it with no one hurt. Okay,
Yeah.
we've inconvenienced a lot of people in the public for a few hours, but I don't care. We've saved a life.
Yeah. Yeah, mate, you're exactly. And look, there's two things that actually, what you just said there, reminded me of a couple of instances. One, we had a really good clinic manager early on out at Millingimby, and there's a lot of people that are on mental health medication and all that over there. And sometimes not a lot of them like to take it, and you could probably understand why. I mean, well, you can understand why because some of them just don't think they need it. However, I
There
will
are,
say,
sorry, mate, there are a lot of bad side effects too from some of these
yes,
psychotropic drugs, and sometimes they don't like the effect that the drugs have, and that causes them to stop taking them too. But
yeah,
that's a bit more going into it. But yeah, sorry, keep going.
yeah. So, and anyway, one of the look, this is for any doctors and or anybody in mental health that works in there. And usually the mental health people are really good. And this guy had worked a lot in mental health. That's why he was really good. And anyway, he got in contact with us, said, "Look, mate, I've got to go around. This guy's been refusing his medication. So I've got to go around to his place. And he hasn't come in yet to take his medication. So we've got to go around to his place. Blah blah." And I said, "Yep, all right." And he said, "Okay, I'm going to ask him to take his medication. As soon as he refuses, I want you to restrain him so I can give it to him." I said, "Yep, not a problem at all, because that's where our powers lie."
Yeah.
He was straightforward in what he wanted to execute, and he then passed over onto the police the powers that we had to
Mm.
use force to get that job done. So it's I mean, I've had other ones where I told you about that one where basically I think it was Ben Udi and I rocked up, and that woman basically jumped off the counter in a locked house and started hanging herself. And we saved her and took her to the hospital, and she was a massive flight risk and all, and they didn't want any restraints or anything like that. They didn't want to jab her. She was going absolutely nuts. And in the end, we're going, look, just knock her out. She needs to
Mm.
go up to Darwin. She needs to be assessed. Like there's no other avenue here. And they were kind of standoffish on doing that. In the end, they had to. But we kind of read that earlier on, and it would have been a lot easier if they'd just knocked her out and sent her up and just let her calm down. I mean, it wasn't our call. However, it meant that we were on guard constantly because they they were kind of restricting on how we handled the job,
Mm. Yeah.
and it made it very hard. So all I can say, anybody dealing with it, just make clear, um, I suppose, advice on how you're going to deal with it, or clear directions on how you're going to deal with it, because then everybody knows where they're standing
Yeah.
um, when you're doing that sort of thing. So um, yeah, mate, that's probably my biggest point when dealing with mental health.
Yeah. Well, that's not too bad, mate. I think we've covered it fairly well. There's a lot of crossover. Like a lot of jobs do involve mental health.
Yeah,
Even when there's criminality involved, there could be mental health involved as well. So it's such a it's a constant. There's acute mental health stuff with people with no criminal history. Like you talk about the old DV. It can send you temporarily crazy. It's a very
Yep.
emotional time, and that's a mental health issue.
Yep.
So,
Mate, sorry, mate.
mm,
I spoke about that woman that was completely convinced that nobody would believe her.
yeah,
And that is, yeah, that's exactly the same what you just said.
yeah, yep.
So,
Yeah, so we've got plenty of content from those shout outs for the next few weeks. Keep it coming.
yep.
We like it. Give us plenty to talk about. But let us
Yeah,
know what you're interested in. Yeah,
it gives me something to do too. Like, well, not that I have plenty to do. Let me tell
gives you
you, but
something else to do.
yeah, that's right. But I do like it because our passion is this podcast,
Mm.
and I do like keeping up to date with it, mate. I did. Now, can you remind me? I didn't give the two shout outs, one to the Hillman's Butcher and one to Newry Cattle Station, have I yet?
No,
So, right. And do forgive me because basically Damo and I were talking about it before, and I couldn't remember we'd press record yet. But first off, I need to do a shout out to Brian at Hillman's in Taringa. He's listened to every single episode. That's my local butcher. Love the guy. Yeah, I mean they do a great job. I mean all the butchers there do a fantastic job. I've always made a point of knowing my local butcher. We should probably give one to Jason Scadden too.
oh,
Um,
what a legend! The Mad Butcher of Kalkaringi.
well, exactly, yeah, mate. And then he took over Town and Country in Catherine.
He did.
Uh,
Yep.
Yeah, and I can tell everybody he was that bloody good that everywhere I went in the territory, that's where I got my meat from.
Yep. Definitely.
Um, yep, I would order it and get it sent in. But yeah, Brian, thank you very much for listening. I go there every week to get my meat, and I think Damo, you and I have actually enjoyed a chuck roast and probably quite a bit of meat from Hillman's. They do a fantastic job, and I'll give them another shout out. In the floods back in 22, I think it was, they would have donated, oh, I don't know, hundreds of dollars worth of sausages when James was a councillor here to help cook for barbecues for people that were affected by the floods.
Yep.
So yeah, big shout out. They did that completely off their own back. We were willing to actually pay for it through council funds, but no, they actually gave us a truckload of sausages, to help and yeah, for cooking the barbecue and all that sort of thing. So yeah,
Mm.
definitely thanks for that. And I did actually mention it. The reason I'm actually giving him a shout out because we gave one to bloody
Chris
Chris
Luxton.
Luxton.
Yeah.
So he's the butcher in anyway. When I was in there getting my meat the other day, bloody Ryan goes, "Oh, Chris Luxton." I said, "Yeah, the butcher down there." And I said, "Oh shit, Brian, you've been listening longer than bloody Chris has. I better give you a shout out." So anyway, and I told Chris this morning I'll give him a bit of shit. So obviously, mate, your meat's shit because I don't buy from you. Um, but no, just joking. Your meat's really good. But honestly, mate, after all these years, buying from you would be like cheating on my missus. Um, it's and mate, we got a shout out that we got asked to do was from Collie Anderson. Put this one in the Newry cattle station between Timber Creek and WA border. Apparently, they listen to our episodes. They download them, and then when they're out in the back country where they don't have reception, they listen to our podcast. So a big shout out to everybody on
Bloody oath. Good on him.
cattle station.
Yeah, and that's the proper back country. There's not much out there.
No,
Yeah. The middle of nowhere.
yeah,
No,
so.
very good.
Yeah, so yeah, mate, that's pretty much us. But yeah, like Damo said, keep them on coming. Yeah, get in contact with us if you want to give a shit. We actually had quite a few laughs over some of the attempts to rubbish us. We did enjoy it.
Definitely. No, very good. Well, mate, we'll be back next week. But yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll go from there.
All right, we'll see you all next week.